Welcome everybody, and welcome to a conversation about transpersonal psychology. And with me today, I have Lucinda Lidstone, and she is going to be talking to us about transpersonal psychology and how she found it, and yeah, her story about studying transpersonal psychology and how she uses it today in her practice. And we'll see where the conversation goes. Last time we met in person, Lucinda and I, we spent about 5 hours talking, and then at the end of it said we should have recorded that. There's some really good stuff in there. So here we go. This is a recording. So, Lucinda, hello. First of all,
Hello.
thanks for coming along today. And
Thank you.
yeah, do you want to just tell us a little bit about where you first found transpersonal psychology, how you found it, how that came about?
Yeah, so um, I think I have to go back to the beginning of when I was really teeny tiny. I was under five, and I remember trying to work out where I was before I was here, and I had no doubt at all that I'd been somewhere before I was here in this Lucinda body. So all my life, I've thought about what's beyond the physical, what's beyond self. My maternal grandmother, who brought me up in my early years, was a Christian lady. So she used to get us to pray every night. So again, that just reinforced this sense of something beyond, something greater. Um, and then in my adult life, it was just a journey to find something that spoke to me really. And I explored Christianity, but didn't really gel with that. And I explored paganism, which seemed to speak to me a bit. I had a lot of loss in my life. As you know, I lost my mum when I was a baby. So I think all of those things informed me. And then, um, yeah, I was very much into the new age scene, really, just exploring all things from astrology to sacred drumming to shamanism, all sorts of things. I was kind of riding that wave. Trained in Reiki, natural medicine and healing. Um, and I've always been very, very intuitive. And then after my husband died, I started working with tarot cards. And I found that people would tell me things that they'd never told anybody else in that kind of intimate setting. And I wanted to be more qualified to be able to help people. I felt out of my depth when people were telling me these really deep, dark secrets. So I started to train as a therapist. Um, and then decided I wanted to do my master's. And I felt that there was this split in me. So one side of me was really practical, really all about the cognitive and neuroscience and that kind of thing, and wanting to know how the brain works and human behavior. And then there was this other very spiritual side of me. And so, but they felt very split and very separate. And I guess I've been frightened of appearing kind of flaky, especially in professional settings. I worked at the Priory, so I worked in a very clinical setting to begin with. So my whole journey was really about blending those two sides, earth and sky, really. And then my supervisor told me about a organization in London, CCPE, and they were the only, or one of the only transpersonal psychotherapy courses, and joined them and just felt like I'd come home because all these people were speaking my language. And some of the weekends we did were really experiential, very deep. I had amazing sort of mystical and spiritual experiences there, which we can talk about later if you like. Um, and I think that was the beginning of blending those two sides, so left brain, right brain, I guess, together. But I feel really my whole life has been about that journey, really.
Hmm. Wow. So you found them and you went to study. So what kinds of things were they studying? What was the course content like?
Well, everything that you would expect in a kind of integrative course, so the different schools of psychotherapy, all of that. But they were looking at the shadow self a lot of Jung. studying. Um, but really, the whole mindset, the orientation is that our suffering is there to bring forth other potentials in us and other aspects to us, and facilitate our personal growth. So to look upon suffering as a gift, and that's really hard, isn't it? You know, especially if you're sitting with somebody who's had severe trauma or abuse. It's hard to say, well, in a way, this can be a doorway to developing more of yourself and finding out different aspects of yourself. A big part of the course also was existential, you know, looking at what meaning and purpose, what gives us a sense of meaning in our life, and how do we find purpose, you know, from everyday mundane things to maybe bigger purposes in life. But yeah, so looking at the shadow, one weekend I remember was about the psychology of success and how we thwart ourselves really, and how we're actually frightened of our success, and it's easier to look at negatives and obstacles than it is to think about being successful and what that might mean for us. That was one really intense weekend. A lot of body work, working with sound, releasing trauma from the body. So yeah, mainly experiential. So I think that's the main thing. It wasn't just theory heavy. It was, you know, really going deep into your own process within yourself, and also within the group dynamics. So I learned so much from there.
Go around the right and left hemispheres, and the fact that, you know, children until they're, I don't know if it's 5 or 6, they're very creative, they're very sort of, you know, they have a lot of joy and wonder and awe about the world, and so they're very right hemispherically functioning, and then they go to school generally, and there's this kind of narrowing of attention into the more analytical and rational, with you know, what we're told is important is you know, learning. Well, and it is important, of course, but there's a narrowing which often leaves out the whole creative area. And if you look at school curriculums now, you'll see that the time spent for creativity, even in primary schools, has just reduced down to very little, where um, the idea of art or drama or music is not seen as like a serious endeavor. It's seen as like a nice to have, like a kind of, you know, something that's on the periphery of learning. But that's where all the magic happens. That's where, you
Mm.
know, you stay open to you know, just to curiosity, and being, you know, feeling that sense of moving out of that ruminating sort of left hemisphere, and into that area that allows you to think beyond yourself, to think transpersonally. And yeah, so I think, you know, and it's not all cultures. Some cultures really, you know, they really value that right hemispheric functionality, that creativity. You know, the community will come together at the end of the day and celebrate and sing or dance or drum, or because they know that they need that. That needs to be part of the human experience. So that's what excites me about transpersonal psychology, it's not even like a new thing to introduce to people. It's kind of like a reminder of who they were when they were young, and just saying that is all still there. You know, that is all still, all that sort of emotion, all that joy, all that wonder is still there. But also we've got the unconscious, which is the right hemisphere, which also is it holds all of our experiences. So, you know, we've got, well, if we go into, like, people even in meditation, or people who go into psychedelic state, or you know, various forms of consciousness expansion, they'll experience this kind of, like you say, this sort of shadow area that comes up, which meets them with stuff that they've kind of pushed away, you know, for sometimes for years and years. Um, yeah, so that's my idea of the dual brain science. And we talk to people about Jill Bolte Taylor, who had that amazing experience, and you know of her, don't you? What do you think of her experience?
Well, just before we go there, I just want to recap actually on something you just said, because I think it's important that, both sides of the brain are important. And I think for young people, it's also really important to develop your sense of self and your own ego, and to have that sense of self and a strong ego, because that's what's going to carry you through the world. So, I think it's important that we don't favor one over the other, but I think we really have um, lost that sense of creativity, as you say, in our culture, because we've been oriented towards problem solving. Um, so and also, if there is something in my training that was spoken about, which is spiritual bypass. So, the transpersonal realms, if you want to put it that way, for some people, they can escape there and want to escape working through their trauma or working through whatever they're suffering. And in that way, then you don't learn the lessons from that. So everything is always about balance, isn't it? So there, it's not to denigrate or ignore left brain thinking, because absolutely you need both. So I just wanted to make that point before we move on. No, I'm not very good with names. So Jill Bolt Taylor, remind me. I probably do know her story, but I'm not off the
She
top of my head.
she was she was a, I think she's a neuroanatomist, and she's based in the States, and she
Oh, she's the lady that had the stroke.
had the
And
stroke.
yeah,
Yeah.
and she couldn't remember how to dial the phone. And yeah, I remember her story. Fascinating story that is. Yeah.
Fascinating. And so
Yeah.
she had the stroke in the, and so which kind of literally like blew out her left hemisphere and left her just with right hemispheric mode. And she's got the, and normally if that happens with people, they're not able to recount their experience, because if the left hemisphere goes, the verbal center goes, the verbal
Mm.
center is taken offline. So people can't remember or can't sort of, give an account of it. But for some reason she could. She the last thought she said she remembers before is, this is amazing. I'm going to be able to actually experience something I've studied from the inside. So she has, something in her kind of wills herself to remember everything that happens. Um, and it's a long trek for her, because she loses kind of all functionality for about 8 years. It takes about 8 years to kind of heal and come back sort of, with speech and with even mobility, I think it was right. But how she expresses it is that this full state of right hemispheric experience is kind of just in a sea of bliss, and just all the intuition is working at really high level.
Yeah.
She could tell what kind of energy people would bring into the room,
Mm.
like in a hospital room. She could see the energy and feel the energy, um, and just that, all fear, all anger, all kind of negative emotion left her, and she was left feeling just kind of blissful, and time had no consequence. So this kind of time space sort of disappeared. So it's just an amazing example, and I think it's one of the only examples of somebody just completely functioning in right hemisphere. And she'll talk about it almost in a spiritual way, sort of saying that this, it just felt like she had this kind of deeper connection to something beyond herself as well. I think her YouTube, no, her TED talk, where she's explaining all of this. And
Yeah.
I think it was her first TED talk. I think it's got about 30 million views or something.
Yeah,
It's
it's
really,
amazing. That's where I came across her. And
yeah.
it was interesting. I'm glad you made the point that in that right hemisphere, there is complete loss of fear. It
Mm.
just doesn't exist, to the point where she was able to realize, oh, this is interesting, what's happening to me. There's no fear that, oh my God, the horror and the terror of what's happening, I might be dying. It was, oh, this is interesting. This is, yeah. So, and I think that's, coming back to death and fear of death, that's really important to know, isn't it? That the fear of death is associated with the loss of this, isn't it? The ego, the physical. And when you go through those doorways into the right hemispheric thinking, it just isn't there. I don't know that fear is there. I think that
Yeah.
there can be the fight, the fear that comes with the fight of, ego death, as we say, or the loss of the material. But I it's such an expansive place. Anybody that's done even, deep meditation or anything will know that expansive space where there's just no fear about loss of self at all.
And, it's sort of interesting if we had an education system, or even just a culture where we introduce this concept to people as they're developing, um, to try and ensure that they visit that state, or spend time in that state. um what difference it would make to people's mental health, particularly young people who, they now have got all of the sort of stresses of this, of studying, or this life that's ahead of them, and this expectation level from all around. And so, the idea of them escaping into this sort of realm of, less fear, and more about the sort of spiritual self. I wonder how that would impact. That would be amazing but a lot of the study, and I know Lisa Miller from Columbia
Mm.
University, her research is amazing. I know you've looked at her.
Well, and also I was going to ask you, because in the schools that you ran, you were really encouraging that in young people. Because I guess where I'm a bit stuck, I guess, is that I'm coming from that psychotherapist perspective of, well, the work of adolescence is to develop the sense of self and develop your own values and where do I belong and how do I relate to people. So what would you say about seeing that more balanced, um, working with that more balanced view with young people? What would you say about that? Because you've got direct experience of that.
Mm. Well, we just saw it transform young children. So there was a school from, that had children 5 to 10, and then there was a secondary school in Scotland. So the first school was in Los Angeles, secondary school was in Scotland, and the school in Scotland was from age 14 to maybe 18, something like that. Um, and what we learned was that it doesn't matter what age they are, whether young children or young adults. If you give them an opportunity and a space to be creative through different means, through music, through drama, through walking out in nature, and just kind of, and you take that pressure off them of that continuous academic striving. It turns their life around. It really does. We had a lot of children in both schools come in. They'd been in other schools and were kind of, they just came in just broken down. You could tell they were just wounded. Some of them were just, in the primary school in the States, some kids would just come in and sit in the corner of my office for like a week or two, just kind of unable to even move. They were so broken down by their experiences in their other schools. Um, and this environment was kind of just open and free. There was like chess being played in the morning. There was a rack of dress up clothes that, any of them, and some of them were 10, they'd come in and kind of, get into different outfits and start kind of being, swashbuckling pirate or something on the seas. And it was just like play. And we did project based work, which was incredible, because and there's so much learning taking place. There's just
Yes.
so much learning. There was one family who the mum, she was making me laugh because she came in, she said, we had people over for dinner. It's like a dinner party, and she had, the girls were there, she had two daughters. And she said to the girl, I think one of them was 7 and one was 9, something like that. And one of the people at the table said, and what are you girls learning at school? And they're like, we're learning about the Russian Revolution, and about how, and they started talking about this family that we were studying, because we were reading this book about this young girl's experience of the Russian Revolution. And this mum said, what they didn't know about the Russian Revolution is that I was sitting there, all the adults just stopped what they were doing, listening, but because they were so, engrossed in what they were talking about, and just so interested in the lessons. And it wasn't even lessons, it's kind of like a project where you just create something where they're doing like little plays and stuff like that. So you're just always trying to speak to this integrated conscious state, which is, like you say, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere together. Yeah, and that's how it's supposed to be. They're working together. Left hemisphere is kind of, bringing you the verbal skills and the writing skills, and the right hemisphere is being creative and yeah, and with the older, I'll stop in a minute because I could talk about this for 2 hours. The older children as well, they you know and so the what I found was that we did the work we did was based on something called React to the Past, which is from Barnard University in New York, and they work with this drama program, and they do it in universities, and they see students. There's a oh gosh, the name of the guy. He's written a book called Minds on Fire. Mark Carnes. There you go. His name's Mark Carnes. Wrote a book called Minds on Fire, and that's where I first came across this kind of program. And literally it is like their minds are on fire with just the kind of the learning and the you can't you go in, you say to them, it's 4 o'clock, you all need to go home, you should have been going home half an hour ago, and they're like, yeah, I've just got to write this kind of presentation for tomorrow I'm giving for. So there is a different way to educate that includes this expanded consciousness, which is transpersonal consciousness, and it is all there, but we just don't use it in our education system. Um,
No.
so yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, there's just tons of information about that.
Yeah, well, and so much is relevant in what you said, because what we're seeing in my field, I no longer work with young people, but what we were seeing is that increased diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and so those children, their standard education is not working for them at all. And what I loved about the kind of things you were saying is that's how I might work with adults in my session. It's like, try on this aspect, try on that aspect. I love that idea of dressing up and drama, because it gets us, it allows us to work with other parts of ourselves. So you might be a person that says, oh, I really lack confidence, or I'm not very good at that. And then, but acting or telling a story or drama enables you to pretend that just for today, I'm going to pretend and behave as though I were confident in the world. And then you realize actually that does live in me somewhere. So I just love that. And of course the power of story, you've only got to look throughout history, and before we're all able to read and write, storytelling is how we learn. And it's just so much more accessible, isn't it, to the brain to receive information about stories, particularly history, like someone's real lived experience helps you learn. So it's so much more accessible than just being given a bunch of facts and figures and dates that you're going to learn by parrot fashion. And that's not really wisdom, is it? That's not really understanding. That's just remembering a load of facts and figures. And so I'm just so inspired by all your stories of how you worked with those kids. Just wonderful. But it's that they're the doorways that we as adults. I did a whole presentation about the importance of play and how we lose that as adults, because we tend to think adulthood is all about being responsible and practical, and of course it is, but we have to make space for that playful self, because
Yeah.
that's the doorway to other aspects of us and things, as you say, beyond us.
Absolutely. I think, what I noticed as well, particularly beneficial, was for boys, like adolescent boys, because they would take on a character and they could kind of speak through the character. So there was no scripted text for the characters. It wasn't like, here's your script and read it. They had to create their own script and their own character. So say we were in Scotland, one of the big projects we did was around like the Patrick Seller and the kind of the takeover of the Scottish lands and things like that. And so the boys kind of really, one was a landowner, another one was so they really kind of imbue these characters, and they're able to then sort of they're able to give voice to something that's in them anyway, and that starts coming
Mm,
out.
exactly.
And so then you'll notice that their capacity for communication with other boys and other girls in the class just increases and increases. So you'll notice them then having conversations when they're not in character that are just so much more sort of, I don't, enlightened or developed or something, where this character has given them something. It's like it's just so incredible. But Mark Carnes in that book goes into great detail, and he's explained everything, and also he's explained, like you were saying, if you learn things by rote, that's forgotten about, not
Let's
long.
face it, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they remember it until they've got to do their exam, and then they're like,
yeah,
oh,
and then that's
that
it.
information can go. But these projects that they do, these kind of react to the past, they call them, um, seem to just stay in them. It seems to kind of just go into their psyche and their soul, sort of thing, and just live in them, because they've also experienced like the emotions that those people from the past of experienced. It's really really powerful. So yeah, and I don't know why we still educate the way we do. I keep saying, well, even if you talk to the young people who went to our school in Scotland, and this is probably 6 years ago now, if you ask them anything about the Highland clearances, they know everything. Like they can like repeat it, they'll just, because they remember everything every character said and what happened, and even all the facts and figures of what went on then. So so what I talk to people about now is transpersonal approach is just not only for mental wellness and mental health. It's also, I'd love to see it being talked about, transpersonal education, transpersonal leadership, just kind of, and for people to know what you're talking about, because we were just talking a little while ago about a big problem with transpersonal psychology is the language around it.
Yeah.
So you want to kind of speak to that?
Yeah, I think because because it's beyond the concrete and beyond the physical, it can be hard to language can be hard. It can be hard to get hold of the concepts even. Even though I work with this every day, it's hard for me to language because it's like trying to grasp smoke, you can't get your hands around it. And of course, um, the views amongst professionals are very diverse and very, very different. Another thought I had as you were talking, I was going to ask you, and then you started speaking about it, is if you do access the transpersonal realms, how does that affect our relationships with each other? Because, there's a lot of awfulness in the world, isn't there? And if transpersonal, if the transpersonal was brought more into education, would our relationships be better? Because, that's central to my work, is all about relationship. But I remember also that you and I had a conversation about it was we were talking about the psychedelic world where people literally go through those doors and access, have literally have their minds expanded. And yet we were saying that there are some people where there still seems to be a lot of ego and a lot of jealousy and a lot of competitiveness and not a lot of personal insight and wisdom. So I think also I don't want to be negative, but I'm very much about giving a balanced view that I don't know. It's not like this is the doorway to utopia necessarily, is it? You still have got to do the work on yourself. So
Mm.
I guess, what do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, because in thinking of those young adults doing those projects, and um, sometimes it would leave them with something bigger to think about and more complex and not always pleasant. They
Mm.
would come face to face with, how humanity can be quite cruel at times, or quite, dismissive of other people. And so they had kind of had to face that. So yeah, and you're right, to say that transpersonal psychology is all about just finding the joy within, is not the case. It's kind of challenging, and it's kind of like it pushes you to this kind of development or this growth that, some people want to do and some people don't want to do, which is, it's their own personal decision. Some people are like, not really interested in that, just kind of want to, focus and kind of live my life as I'm doing. And other people are like, no, feel this real need to kind of for some sort of growth and some sort of forward motion. I feel like that's why I'm here, or that's going to make my life meaningful. And I think you're right, talking about the psychedelic experience. People, which it's a really hard one to unpack, and that would take hours on its own just to kind of to kind of grapple with that. But basically, the psychedelic experience can take you to a dimension that, and it is a dimension, it feels like a kind of another realm where you have to face kind of like, yeah, darkness within, the darkness that's within.
Mm.
And but it's, and I think of transpersonal psychology as beyond the self, but also beyond the practical self. So beyond the practical, rational left hemisphere, which and pushing us into this kind of unconscious realm where all of our joy and our emotion, our creativity is, but also all of that stuff that has been kind of packed away
The
because
unprocessed. Yeah.
unprocessed. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Even since like, like childhood, or even as a
Mm.
baby, or some people even think like in the womb. If you look at
Yeah.
Stan Groff's work, he'll talk about that perinatal kind of um challenges. And so yeah, so it's kind of like not for the faint-hearted. It's almost like you've kind of got to go through the difficulty to get to a state where you are almost like at peace with yourself, I suppose. Would you say that was
Yeah, and I think coming back to, I veered us off your question, which is interesting because we were saying, how do we talk about the transpersonal? Um, and I think we all need different things, don't we? And some, I've been absolutely, many people have said, oh, Lucinda's too intense, because I like to do these deep thinking about things and explorations. But, some people might just want to be more creative in their work, mightn't they? In a really practical way. Um, Not everybody wants to sort of contemplate their own navel, as it were. Um, and I think, I guess psychedelics, like anything else, it's a doorway and an opportunity, isn't it? That's literally what it is. It's that we're talking about liminal spaces, which are doorways, and it's up to you what you do with that. It's up to, isn't it? You have choice. Um, and but I think also, if we're talking about psychedelics, you don't know whether you're going to be made to confront yourself. Might just have a really pleasant, gentle experience, but you do not know, and we can't predict. And that's exactly what you said at the retreat. You can't predict. Nobody can predict what kind of experience you're going to have, and are you going to be confronted with yourself? But my feeling is that we don't get anything that we can't handle and we're not ready for necessarily, if you've got the right support and you've got the right attitude. Um, so yeah, there is no shortcut to doing the work and taking time to reflect and think about things. But that's not for everyone, as you've said. Somebody might just want, as I said, to be more creative, or to understand difficulties in relationships easier, better. So yeah, it's not for everybody. Not everybody's going to go to those depths, are they? They're not.
No, not at all. And I think it's got I think it's got, some people are really right hemispherically sort of functional just naturally. That's kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
who they are, and it doesn't have to be art or music, or it can be getting lost, in like, watching football, or sort of, I don't know, just anything that kind of moves you from that ruminating state of oh God, what, just like the constant kind of anxiety wheel of worry, and anything that moves you out of that, and to another space, another state, another way of attending to the world, is for me is transpersonal, is that kind of moving out of the state that feels like an echo chamber. And sometimes it's really hard to get out of. It feels like an echo chamber that you're just bouncing around in. And I know if I do too much admin work, like if and I've been doing quite a bit lately because I've got a new course starting, and it's like it it's got, you know, I'm kind of happy about it, but it takes time away from me doing kind of like research or reading into things that I really, you know, love to do. And that takes me out of the kind of practical realm. And so if I don't go there on a daily basis, I end up feeling like I don't know, like it feels kind of like depletion or so like
It's
you kind of
narrow. Yeah.
yeah, it's
One's really narrow and focused, and the other is expansive, isn't it? So
yeah.
if coming back to this idea of what language can we use, I might throw that out. And again, any language is restrictive, but you've got the expansive realms and you've got the focused realms. And again, both are needed. But coming back to what you were saying about kind of getting stuck in that loop, that's what we find when someone comes to therapies, because you've been thinking the same problem over and over and over again, and there's nothing new coming in. And even that's the whole purpose of talking therapies, is because the minute you start to hear yourself say it out loud, it becomes different. The minute you've got somebody else's input, it becomes different. There's an opportunity for something to change, for inspiration. So if you're just stuck in that, so we go out, like you saying, I love that word, ruminating. We go over and over and over a problem and just think, if we can just think about it for a little bit deeper and a little bit harder, we'll come up with another idea. But you don't, because you're not opening that expansive part of the brain where inspiration might drop in. And how many times have you, because you write stuff, I know, and how many times have you written something and then thought, my goodness, where does that even come from? It's almost like you're channeling something, or you're tapping into something greater than yourself. So again, how do we talk about the transpersonal? You might be a really down to earth person that writes, but you'll know that expansive state where ideas come, where imagination happens. Most of us fantasize in one way or another. That you're tapping into that realm, into that creative, expansive realm when you daydream, when you fantasize, when you wish for things. You're stepping through that doorway.
Yeah, definitely. And you'll hear songwriters say that, you know, they don't
Yeah.
really know where the song came from. It just seemed to kind of, you know, it seems to be like a download of sorts, or yeah, so there's this sort of who writes about that? Elizabeth, I
You're
remember she
so
wrote
good with names. You're so good
yeah,
with names. That's because
oh,
you're a
I was
teacher.
saying it now, but she wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Yes.
So yeah, I can't remember. Their
Yeah.
name will come to me in a minute.
Yeah.
Um, and she writes about that. She writes about sort of that creative that creative download, that creative spark that does seem to come from somewhere else. But you've got to be open to that. You know, it generally won't happen if you're doing that ruminating sort of,
No,
you
because
know,
you're blocking it.
verbal. Yeah,
Mm.
you're kind of blocking it. You always
Yeah.
have to go into that expanded state for
Yeah.
for that to be open for those kind of downloads to happen. Um,
But there's
which is
there's
so
lo sorry, there's loads of scientists and mathematicians, isn't there, that say that they've dreamt. I think Einstein even dreamt the answer to an equation, or some inspiration came through a dream,
yeah.
that moved on their theory or whatever it was they were working on. So, even if
Yeah,
you're a really scientific, rational person, there's loads of examples of that, isn't there?
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
He had an image of himself riding through space on a moonbeam, and then kind of was able to figure out things from that and go, oh, actually, that's why this happens. And yeah, so but the state, you know, the state is all important, and you know, but we people don't know how to do that, you know. And meditation is one thing. A lot of people talk about mindfulness or meditation, but that feels like a kind of a willpower thing, that you kind of try and focus on something and you try and keep out the thoughts that are intruding, and that can be quite difficult to do. And also, I found in the schools that well, I think both schools actually, and the younger children and the older children generally didn't like to meditate. They didn't like to meditate, but you could take them on a nature walk, which we did a lot
Yeah.
because they should be out a lot. Um, Take them on a nature walk, ask them to sit next to a stream and focus on the sounds they can hear of nature, the stream, maybe a bird, you know, maybe the wind rustling the leaves or whatever. And they can do that and go into a lovely meditative state because you're not telling them to don't think of anything, you know, just kind of keep the thoughts at bay. So there's different ways around that, and that's another thing that we look at is these modalities of transpersonal psychology. You know, all of these things that you can do that helps you move into that state. I was talking to a woman the other day who works with horses and in a therapeutic way. So people come and work with her, and she works on creating this bond between the horse and the person, and
Mhm.
the person rides a horse, but has got to gain the horse's trust first by doing
Mhm.
these certain steps. And I said that's so transpersonal, that is just like such a transpersonal approach to. And she said, yeah, this person said that they'd had therapy for years and years, which hadn't gone close to what they'd achieved in that one day, because it kind of goes into the body, that felt sense, you know. So I was going to ask you about talk therapy, because how much talk therapy do you think? So I heard what you said about sometimes when people hear their voice, hear themselves sort of say something that they have been thinking about themselves, and then they hear someone else come back with another version of that, or to think about that in a different way. So I totally understand that. But do you think, is there other times when that is very, it doesn't work, or it's difficult for them to move out of that, or they can do for a little bit of time, but then they kind of default back into that kind of ruminating sort of phase? I mean, is there, is there, just in comparing that into like what I just said, that woman working with somebody who works kind of like in a felt sense, that maybe, because what that person said was that at the end of the day, they felt a real kind of connection and affection and almost love for this animal. So, this horse that had just been so gentle with him, and just kind of, just kind of looking at each other, and, so what do you think is, what do you think is the difference there? Or what do you think is the difference between working in the verbal center, which is a left hemisphere, and then working in the sort of right hemisphere? What do you think? I know there's a lot there, but
No, no, no. Well, I just want to finish off your other point. So how do we enter those states? And a lot of people just cannot. They find it really hard to sit there and cultivate that meditative state. But you mentioned music, rhythm, dancing, even just walking in a rhythm, that will take you there, following the breath of the body. And you often will hear people that run saying, well, I get in the zone. I get in the zone. Well, that your accent, you get all sorts of opportunities throughout your everyday, don't you, to enter into that realm. We're doing it naturally in and out. If you study hypnosis, they talk about being in the trance state. That's being in that alpha state in the brain. And we're all in that, in and out of that state. How many of us have been driving our car and then suddenly thought, shit, I don't remember where I've been driving, because you've gone into that space. So it doesn't have to be this big set aside space and meditate for half an hour. It doesn't have to be that. It can just be getting into the rhythm of your body, or drumming. For me, drumming takes me there, absolutely takes me there, or chanting or singing. So there's many ways of getting into that meditative state, but not just sitting there on your cushion. So I just wanted to make that point. Um,
hmm.
Talking therapies, the limitations, I guess yeah. So for a while, a colleague of mine, I had a horse, and we used to take some of our kids that were on the spectrum, we used to take them to the stables, because there's just no point in trying to sit there having that conversation in a room with somebody on the spectrum like that. It's just not, they don't have enough sense of ego. Relating is difficult for them, so something else is needed. So absolutely, that we would take them to the stable, they would just feed the horse, brush the horse, muck out the horse, and you would just see them transform. And I think when you were talking about education before, we're so stuck in our left brain that we want to be able to evidence things and say, right, okay, and what are you going to do? A parent will say, what are you going to do with my child? And they don't realize that if you just open up these doorways, I know I keep saying that, but if you open up these doorways, then we trust that that person will develop and work it through and process it through themselves. So I'm very, in my field, you've always got the latest therapy that's going to be wonderful and you only need 1 session or 4 sessions. And and there's a lot of suspicion and negative things said about long-term depth therapy, which is what I do. So I'm very reluctant. I think we had a conversation, you and I, about psychedelics, and maybe we thought that that would be the magic pill. And I think it's in our nature to want to find that magic pill, especially in the culture that we live in now. It's like quick fix. We don't want to spend any time. We haven't got time to devote to anything. So I will say that first. I'm very reluctant to say that anything is the thing. It's horses for courses, isn't it? But I think as a therapist, you just need a fully equipped tool bag. And some people are never going to go there, but I've had grown men cuddling a dolly that represents the little them when they were a kid, and curled in the fetal position and really moving through that terrible trauma. And it's so humbling when you're sharing that really deeply personal experience with somebody. And yeah, as I said, sometimes people just need to hear themselves out loud, but sometimes people are just not going to shift, and no amount of this. And in fact, they'll hide behind that, because you might have a really intellectual type person, and they can analyze until the end of time, but there's nothing shifting. Insight is not enough on its own. But I think what's not understood about therapy is that it's complex. It's a dance, and that's what I would say. You need a fully equipped tool bag, and you need to know and have enough humility to know if you're not helping somebody. And there are people who've sat with me maybe for 4 sessions and said later on, "Oh, you've transformed my life." And I've thought, what? I didn't do any. I only saw you for 4 sessions. And other people I know that I've worked with for a very long time, and I know I haven't helped them. I know it's been of no use. They're no different from the day they go out the door to the day they come in. And there's also something about sitting with people and sitting with people's energy. And I think a lot of things happen between us that we can't explain, and we can't evidence, and we can't articulate. So I'd like to give a succinct answer to your question, but I can't. But I get from you that you're maybe a little bit skeptical, a little bit suspicious of therapy. I don't know if I've picked up that correctly, but I just felt like you weren't really in favor necessarily.
I think it's like you say. I think there's horses for courses. I think there needs to be a toolbox, and I think mainstream therapy, sort of talk therapy, CBT, even medication, I think that all works for some people. But I think there's a lot of people who it doesn't work for. And I think, to have something for those people, I think is really important. And I think where it stems from, Lucinda, is working with the young adults, like the 14 to 18-year-olds, and they don't really want to talk to you. They don't
No.
really want to sit and talk to a therapist generally. That what I saw, they're generally distrustful. They might have had like kind of wounding experiences from, I don't know, teachers, family members, but they're kind of closed down. And even eye contact is really hard for them. They're just
Yeah.
they've just retreated from the world. So I think that's where it's coming from. Where I know they'd leave the school and go to a session, go to a talk, like a CBT session or a talking therapy. And they'd come back and things just hadn't shifted. And I'd say to them, "How are you feeling?" And they're like, you know, um, and some of them would say, "Well, I feel a little bit better when I'm there," but it kind of, just goes
Doesn't
back to kind of,
last.
yeah, it doesn't
Doesn't
last.
last. Yeah.
So I think that's where that's coming from. And I think that's where sort of my inclination to find something else sort of came from. And or to be able to, and we did kind of find something else, to be honest. We found things for them that was able to shift them, because going into character, being in drama, um one guy came to the school who was 15, and he was just not interested in, send him into a class and he'd just sit there, and we had this sort of approach where I'd say, if you really don't want to go into that class, don't go. There's no point if you're going to go in and sit there and not listen or not learn anything. It's a waste of time. That's what I thought. And I said, you don't have. So he first came to the school. One of his first days, we went for a nature walk. Like, so I kind of fell back and started walking with him, and I said, does all this feel a bit strange? I think there's probably only, there's maybe 12 kids in the class. That's the thing, the smaller classes. And he was like, what's going on here? He was so, and I said, well, we have this thing where you don't have to go to classes if you don't want to. And he kind of, I could see him sort of going, what is going on? This is just like so strange. And I said, what do you like to do? He said, I like to play guitar. And I said, well, bring your guitar into school. One of our teachers, the maths teacher, actually, he plays guitar. I'll ask him to bring his guitar in, and you can do, you can have a little music session, next time he's in. And he did that, and that was kind of his way in. And he spent a lot of time on this guitar, and but and he ended up coming to the lesson, some lessons, not all of them, and he ended up doing his project-based learning stuff where he was in, getting into character, and that was how he kind of grew sort of out, and then he got accepted into college, for music college, and so great. We didn't have to put him through the ringer to sit in maths class and physics class. He was never going to be a mathematician, or even have anything in that line of work. So yeah. So anyway, I'm kind of getting off track, and I always do when I talk about education. And there was one girl in the primary school. She came in, and all she did was crochet. We couldn't get her. She wouldn't even pick up a pen. She was 6. She wouldn't even pick up a pen. And but she'd crochet, and she crocheted for like months and months and months. Before she kind of moved out of herself and went, okay, I'm ready now. I'm ready to kind of join this class and this community. And um so I think we have to be patient. We have to give, young people time, and we have to meet them where they are, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so going back to the talk therapy, I think that's where it comes from me, and I think that's great that there's elements of it that really work for people, and I'm sure there is. But I think that I think we also need, if that doesn't work, then this, then try this, and then try that. And
Well, one of my colleagues, she does exactly that. She'll take young kids into the woods, and they do all sorts of things in the woods. Um, working with knives and fire, and people freak out because it's like, oh, it's not safe. But we don't trust our young people enough. And also, what occurred to me as you were talking is, the different things that we give value to. So we only give value to knowledge that is, as we said, just repeating a load of facts and figures. We only give value to that, and we only think that somebody is skilled if they've got good marks in their exams. And it's not about that. We all have different ways of expressing ourselves in the world, and different ways of being of value, and we're all different, and we learn differently. And I think you absolutely know that, and I know that through my teaching, that people learn and absorb information in very different ways, and their processing is very, very different. And yet we're trying to shoehorn all our kids into this one way of learning and developing and being in the world, and clearly it's not working. So I'm absolutely with you there, 100%. I don't disagree with you there.
And
Yeah.
I think if we can, I think so. So my thought is that transpersonal psychology for me is not therapy. People say, even though it's got psychology in the name, that's kind of like a little bit paradoxical, isn't it? Because you think about psychology in, a person's individual psyche, but then you talk about transpersonal, which means beyond the self. There's a little bit of paradoxical kind of message in that title. So that's what I talk to people, when they come, on the courses, or when I'm speaking to them, I'm like, I don't see transpersonal psychology for me as a therapy. I see it as a mode of education, of a way of showing people that there's different ways of attending to the world, that you've got a practical analytical attention mode that you've been pretty much conditioned to that is important. That's what you need for school. That's what you need to go to uni, or if you're going to uni, or that's what you need for your job. To kind of tying them into the economy. So it seems like our education systems to tie people into the economy
Yeah,
rather than
yeah,
to
of course. Yeah,
develop healthy
yeah.
adults.
And they don't
So
want, I say they don't want people that think critically, because that's not good when you're trying to control people. But
not
look,
helpful.
I don't think it's reductionist. I think you're a teacher. And so what is it to be a transpersonal teacher? I'm a psychotherapist. What is it to be a transpersonal psychotherapist? I can't leave that part of me out. That's who I am through every cell of my body. I am a therapist, and that's who you are through every cell of your body. You're a teacher. That's what you do. So it's like, how is the transpersonal expressed in all these different ways? And it's not, and I'm not your run of the mill therapist either, am I? I'm
Right.
not. And I don't mean that makes me special, but I'm just not. You know who you're talking to. I'm not. But I guess how I see myself is that I am a doorway, and I don't know how I do that, or what it is about me, or it's just my way of doing therapy, that I hold that doorway somehow. It's not about what I do, because I can tell you I've had the most profound experiences with people. And just so profound, so humbling, and I've seen people shift, and I've gone to these strange lands with them. And if you were to ask me once we come out the session what happened, I couldn't put that into words. So there's something that's created between me and the other. Is that therapy? I don't know. More the older I get and the more I talk to you, I just think it is literally that we're creating. I'm able to facilitate that doorway into that world for that person. And so I don't want us to kind of get into this, well, let's take therapy out of it, let's take teaching out of it. It's just the transpersonal. It's like water. It just flows through everything, doesn't it? And how we express it will be what we are in the world. You teacher, me psychotherapist.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely 100%. I think one of the I'll read out in a minute some of the sort of guiding principles that I really like. They haven't come from me; they've come from a guy called Courtwright, I think his name is, um, and and I think, yeah, you're not run of the mill type therapist, and I think if we could sort of replicate a lot of what you do, then therapy would have a different sort of connotation. And I think when a lot of people think of therapists or therapy, or they go to therapy, a lot of them are met with a traditional type um, environment where the therapist tends to keep themselves a little bit distant from the person, and there's a little bit of distance, and there's a lot of listening, and a lot of kind of but obviously, you're a transpersonal type therapist, which gets kind of rolls up your sleeves and kind of gets
Yeah.
in there with that person and makes it about the relationship and makes it about trust, and making that people feel safe to go where they need to go to find that kind of, to find that peace within them that is going to help them. So I think when we talk about therapy, I think we have to know that there's just so many different sort of strains and so many different approaches. So yeah, I think you're right. I think in talking about, you know, for me, transpersonal is quite an education sort of approach, where I like to give people the information, and then you'll have a therapeutic approach, which is kind of a relational, getting in there with maybe a one-to-one type person. And so I think and that's why these conversations are important, to kind of where we can all sort of meet somewhere in the middle, and
Yes.
sort of kind of have this um build some sort of, like we were saying, some sort of language around it and some sort of framework, because that is definitely missing. That's something that we're trying to create. I think that's why we're working together, having these conversations, that we're like, there is a different way to help people, and it kind of looks like this.
It's
Um,
like those Venn diagrams, isn't it? Teacher, psychotherapist, and then you might have somebody from the business world. It's like,
yeah,
where, like you say, where do we all join, and what are the words that are in that part where we all meet?
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think creating that language, building that framework, and we're working on that now where we've got a framework of, it's important to know about neuroscience, about how the brain is working, how it's attending to different things, and what happens when we're in one mode or another mode. Um, I think, knowing about spirituality, knowing that there's a lot of research going on to spirituality, and now that they can do brain scans, knowing that, Lisa Miller's work from Columbia, they scan brains, and she'll say that the architecture of the brain looks different in people who have a spiritual approach to
Mm.
life. And she talks about spirituality. She's like, it's not meaning religion. It's having a belief in something bigger than yourself, and that can
Yeah.
be, nature, the universe, a divine being, whatever it is for you. You just feel like there's something beyond you. There's something bigger than you. Um, and yeah, she'll say spirituality is neuroprotective. People who are spiritual have less depression, have
Mm.
less, suicidal ideation. Um, so we've kind of, so that's part of the wheelhouse of the framework. And also looking at, we talked earlier about mortality, having some sort of approach to how we view death and dying. I think that's important to go in the mix. And also all of those modalities we talked about, so what are the modalities that can take us there? Whether it's talk therapy, whether it's working in a therapeutic way with animals, whether it's um, meditation, whether it's psychedelics. Psychedelics needs a whole conversation on its own because it is so complex. But the research around that is that, a lot of people who have a psychedelic experience have that mystical spiritual experience.
Mm.
So it's like, where is that coming from? Why is that happening? So that's kind of like the area that we live, and that we're trying to define and trying to kind of make available for people to join in the conversation, I suppose. Would you say that's a good sort of way of putting
Yes,
it?
definitely 100%. And coming back to death, um, which we've touched on a lot. We talk about people that are terminally ill or people that have got diagnosis or are dying as though they're somehow different from us. And the truth is, we're all dying, aren't we? We're all
Yeah,
moving towards death.
on our
So,
way.
and people are fearful of talking about that. It's a taboo subject or it's morbid. But I find that the more death is present, the more meaningful my life is. I feel I've really lived my life. There's been a lot of suffering, but I'm very grateful for my life because I'm aware that I will die, and I've been aware that I will die all of my life. And I've thought about that. There's rarely a day goes by when death isn't there one way or another. And it's not morbid. I've had a lot of fear and terror around that. But the flip side is that it's given my life meaning. It stops me, it focuses me, it makes me think about what's important, how I want to spend my time, especially as we get older. You and I are on the down, probably. And I don't know about you, but you're a very busy lady, and I get really precious about how I spend my time and what conversations I want to have because I haven't got so much left of it. So, I think although it's very frightening perhaps to think about your own death, it's very enriching. It makes life more meaningful, really,
Mm,
I find.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. I think what we could do now is I have kind of a list of I would call them sort of transpersonal elements or aspects so they're written by Courtwright. I think his name's Bruce Courtwright. I've got a B, so I'm not quite sure of his first name. But so he's got a list here. So maybe just listen, you could maybe pick out, one of them or two of them and comment, but I thought they were quite interesting. So the first one is that our essential nature is spiritual. Consciousness is multi-dimensional. Human beings have valid urges towards spiritual seeking expressed as a scratch, no, I'm sorry, not a scratch, a search for wholeness, like, could be a scratch, wholeness through deepening individual, social, and transcendent awareness. The transpersonal approach views this entire drama of life as part of a larger journey towards spiritual union. Contacting a deeper source of wisdom and guidance within is possible and is helpful to psycho-spiritual growth. Transpersonal psychology, in accordance with traditional Western psychology, focuses on helping people access their own inner wisdom for greater emotional and psychological integration. Just a few more to go now, 3 to go. Uniting a person's conscious will and aspiration with the spiritual impulse is a superordinate health value.
Which is what you said, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Altered states of consciousness, such as psychedelics, meditation, breathwork, and other practices, are a respected way of accessing transpersonal experiences and can be an aid to healing and growth. And then the final one, the transpersonal approach views an individual and their therapist, practitioner, facilitator as both fellow seekers and evolving beings.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Mm.
I guess what came out of that for me, I would say absolutely for myself personally, I'm a seeker and I'm all about wisdom. And actually that line, what did you say? Accessing your own inner wisdom. I've used that very phrase a lot in my own literature. But what really stands out for me is the desire in humans for wholeness and for union. I think, and there's been a lot of, more perhaps Melanie Klein, psychotherapist, might have said that we yearn for the sense of union with the mother. That's the initial sense of union, but I think it goes beyond that. We yearn for that union with the universe, with the divine, with the spiritual impulse, whatever you want to call that. And I think that there is, I see a lot of that people feel empty or there feels like there's a puzzle piece missing. And I can see where that's happened in their physical development, generally around relationship with parents. But I think it goes beyond that. I think we yearn for that sense of spaciousness, that blissfulness, and for that deep sense of union, oneness. And we know anybody that meditates deeply will know that you get all of that, and you get that sense of deep connection. And we yearn for that at a really deep level. So that's really what stood out to me from that list. That's a great list, isn't it? What's the
I
guy's
thought
name?
so. Yeah, so his name, and it's written in a book. So his name, I'll just make the type in bigger so I can see it. So his, I think it's Bruce Courtwright, Corwright, and the book is Psychotherapy and Spirit: Theory and Practice in Transpersonal Psychotherapy, and it
Yeah,
was written
you
in
mentioned you mentioned this before. I thought the name was familiar. Yeah,
1997. He wrote that book.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I like that as well because it it kind of it just sort of gives a good overview as to what's trying to be achieved through transpersonal. And I loved the part of uh having people, I can't find it now, but having a person sort of take that on themselves, take that work on themselves, work with someone to help them, but then also not be reliant on another person forever to be able for their own mental well-being, to be able to go and get help and seek, another's ideas and what to do about it, but then at some point to be able to integrate that themselves within themselves and to be able to feel that sense of empowerment, I suppose, within themselves, like, yeah, I can do this now myself. And I think that's Yeah, a lot of times I think that people do need that help through those kind of we'll talk about those liminal spaces where life just gets really churny and just, kind of people don't know which way is up and what's going on. Um, and because we culturally we haven't got that sort of we haven't got that, that I don't know, that wisdom or something to turn to for, to go to the leader of
Well, the
the
guide,
tribe.
it's about being a
The guy.
guide, isn't it? And I think maybe we're getting to it. I think that's the misconception of therapy more and more, is that you're going to an expert and they're going to give you the answer or they're going to fix you. And
Mhm.
it's not that at all. And because you know yourself, you can't, if your students kept coming to you and saying, oh, Mrs. Teacher, please give me the answer, please, they never learn anything. You've got to be able to, it is facilitating the access to that wisdom for that person, which absolutely I believe that it lives in all of us. And what you need and what's right for you right now in your life isn't going to be what I need and what's right for me. It's not. So, I think maybe we can meet there, that it's not that I'm fixing anybody at all. I'm opening up. I'm a facilitator that helps them open up those places in themselves. So I'm 100% agreement in of what you just said there. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I know I've known you long enough now to know that you've got that humility as well. Like the last point there says, to recognize that the therapist, the practitioner, facilitator, whoever it is, that they know that you and the person you're working with, you're both fellow seekers and evolving beings. And that
Yeah.
person who comes to look to you to work with them is also going to make you think of how you sort of look at the world and respond. And so there's an evolving development happening in you as well with each person that you meet and each person that comes along. And I know that's how you work in that way. And so that's why it is important for people, whether they're educators or therapists or in leadership in business, to have awareness of that, what transpersonal is and what it means, and to be able to do that, to meet in the middle. And yeah, but I think I think humility is key. It's to be able to say, I'm just going to be open to where we need to go with this and willing to pick out different tools that we need to work with. Um, and what we're looking to do is to get you where you need to go, where you feel like you can stand on your own feet and you don't need me anymore, sort of thing.
And
And I think,
sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm really interested, like, so one area of limitation for talking therapies is what I did my master's on, which is voice hearing and psychosis and things like that. All we do is we medicate people, and that might be helpful for short-term psychosis, and but for longer term, people that hear voices and they're torturous voices and they're tormented by that, there's no help whatsoever. And doing just standard talking therapy is not changing anything either. So I'm really interested in how the transpersonal can help people like that. So it gives them a framework, I guess, for making meaning of that. But that's one area that I've, really, really unwell people that are really struggling and don't have both feet in consensus reality. I'm interested in exploring how transpersonal conversations can help them, because you probably wouldn't say that you would want those kind of people to do psychedelics, for instance, because there's not a strong enough sense of self necessarily to come back to, which of course you need.
Yeah.
But so it's quite risky actually for people like that to access psychedelics. But it seems to me that might be exactly what they need. So I'm interested in that area. And I'm also interested, you've touched on it a couple of times, what's the transpersonal in business? I'd like to talk to somebody from the business world, because I don't really have a picture of what that looks like. How do you blend? How does a businessman uh, with a big corporation, how do they blend the transpersonal with that? So I'm really interested in having those kind of conversations.
Which
Yeah,
is
we're
amazing.
going to have a lot of interesting conversations, aren't we?
Yep, we certainly are. We certainly are. Well, we could talk for another 3 hours, I'm sure, but we'll bring this one to a close. Um, yeah, as always, really amazing to talk to you.
And to
Really
you.
loved it. And yeah, we'll be talking again, I'm sure, soon. Thank you so
Absolutely. We
much.
will. We will.
Thanks, Linda. You take care.
Okay.